Hi everyone, today's video going to be quite interesting because I'm going to redraw my first ever digital drawing. The original was made back when I got my first ever graphic tablet, XP Pen Artist 22E Pro, which was more than 6 years ago. A lot has changed since then. I don't use the same art program anymore, I have a new graphic tablet now, and my art abilities have undoubtedly improved. The art the original drawing had been painted in is Side 2. It was completely unfamiliar to me at the time, as I've only seen it in Vivzipop speed paints before, which is actually the reason why I decided to use it at all as my first drawing software, and it was also free. It was and still is a nice simple art program that I would definitely recommend, especially since it's free again. However, I personally decided to switch to Krita at some point. It's also free but offers more options and looks more professional overall, at least I think that. Which is why I was using it for my little remaster this time around. In terms of graphic tablets, the one I'm currently using is XP Pen Artist 24 Pro. It is slightly better than my previous one, I love the scroll wheel a lot, but overall it didn't affect my process, especially since I was mostly outside while drawing and primarily used XP Pen Magic Drawing Pad. A very good tablet, I absolutely love it. But without any other delays, let's get to my time lapse and see what I've drawn. I was initially going to use my standard canvas size, the same that is used for shorts and YouTube videos, 1920 to 1080, or an even bigger one, which I use more often, 3840 to 2160. However, later I realized that maybe a more rectangular shape would work better for this particular piece. The way my drawing had been initially made and structured was not interested in the slightest. It's just a flat side view. It's fine, but also it's not anything unusual or emotion-provoking, and while I'm trying to make every single piece I create special in some way, even in the slightest, teeniest way, I couldn't settle on that. So I decided to choose a different angle for my redrawing, while the characters themselves were still kept at pretty much the same positions in pretty much the same poses. The only character whose position had been changed was this witch woman with a bow in her hand, hiding behind a rock, controlling these dragons from the sidelines. Though it was a neat idea, it proved hard to make work on a new canvas. I couldn't really think of a good way to draw her in that position, cause then we wouldn't really see her and I kinda wanted to show her off in a way. So I decided, screw that, she's going to be the only character who I'm going to change the position of, and she's going to be standing between her two dragons, and they're all going to be attacking this one poor girl who I actually don't know the name of. Back when the original had been drawn, I was simply trying to draw whatever for the sake of trying out my new tablet, and she's just some random character who looks suspiciously like me. I still feel like when it comes to animal anatomy, and in this case dragon anatomy, I might not be the best of the best, cause I have a lot more experience with people and human-like characters, and that's cool in its own way, I'm happy about that, but at the same time I feel really bad for animals. It's not that I can't draw them, I certainly can, but slower and with slightly more struggles throughout the process. I think those dragons turn out okay though. The big one reminds me a lot of old cartoonish style of drawing. Not sure I was purposefully going for that, it was mostly just me trying to make him look like a dragon in some way. And even though I would say that his design is not my favorite, it's fine. It does the job well enough. The small dragon, on the other hand, I really like. I've always liked the smaller dragon's pose, and since in the new version it's pretty much the same, the new smaller dragon is very good, in my opinion. Its talons going up, the little wings spread wide, his mouth and his tongue stretching out, that's intimidating. It's a small fella, but it's still quite scary. The girl in front definitely became smaller. Now that I'm looking at the original piece, it seems like she's crazy big compared to everyone else, especially to the magician slash witch lady who looks tiny in comparison, considering the witch is in the foreground and the girl is in the back. When it comes to background, there isn't much to show off, but to be fair, the original doesn't really have much either. The majority of the canvas is taken out by the large dragon and the rest of the characters. Little space left was just enough for the volcano and the sky above it, and that's it. One funny comparison my brother had made was between this version's background and backgrounds from Transformers Prime. That's a very good series, by the way. If you haven't watched it, even if you're not a Transformers fan, just go ahead and try. Strongly recommend it. But that's beside the point. If anything, yes, I would say that their backgrounds are usually quite barren. To be fair, it doesn't really affect the show much, and it was made a while back when 3D was still just developing. But still, getting back to the topic of my background, it still looks decent. Yes, it's not detailed, the comparison was quite on point, but that's also kind of the point of this background. Sorry for repeating the same word. You don't exactly see that many trees or grass or life at the top of a volcano, which is why it makes sense. One of the things that improved drastically apart from my anatomy in general is the way I apply light to my drawings. Because in my original drawing, there is basically no light source, everything is just the same. Technically speaking, I tried creating shadows in some places and maybe some resemblance of light, especially in the wings and maybe around the sphere that the magician girl was holding, but overall there are just the same colors all over the picture. In my new drawing, however, there are some very good shadows and strong light resulting from the sphere because it's one of the central parts of this piece, and that's how the magician controls these dragons. And you kind of see some faint line around the dragon's eyes, trying to indicate that yes, they are under control, and maybe they wouldn't have done that or otherwise. Attacking the girl, I mean. In fact, maybe they could be the girl's friends, who are now turning on her because of this dark magic that the witch is applying. I keep switching between witch and magician, and I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but I'm sorry, you're dealing with this now. Anyway, some faint light from the volcano is also a nice touch, I think, because in the original one you can kind of see some reddish color in the hole where the dragon is coming from, but it doesn't really look like light, and I mean, to be fair, not all volcanoes have magma right at the top so you can see it shining brightly, but still it looks better that way and contrasts really well. There is some bright red light source, there is some bright blue light source, and we also have some neutral light source because it's daytime and there is some daylight. Oh, and I would like to point out that there is a shadow under the dragon's wing, specifically the left one. I nearly forgot about it as I was adding finishing touches, but I'm glad I didn't. It is far from the most visible element of this piece, but it simply makes sense and stacks well on top of other light and shadow related choices we've discussed earlier. Another thing that improved drastically is the way I create textures. Back when my first picture was created, I was doing everything with just one brush, maybe two brushes at best. In my new drawing, on the other hand, I'd used plenty of brushes, and some of them are very specific texture brushes, like the one you can clearly see as scales all over the big dragon's body. Hair makes a lot more sense now as well. In the original one you can kind of see some attempts at creating hair. I had already been drawing for quite some time and was still in art school at that point after all, but I'm more confident in what I'm doing now and have some hair brushes to use as well. Though even without hairbrushes, I can now create the mix of cartoonish and realistic / believable, which is what we can see in this new version, and which is what I usually do. You can see it in other pieces of mine as well. Apart from that, I don't think there is much else I can add. I didn't have any major difficulties in this piece. If anything, I was just curious to try. Besides, it was my way of distracting myself in between working on character reference sheets. I have about 10 of them already, but there are more to go. On one hand, it's great. I have a lot of characters. On the other hand, that's a bit tiring because all of them require my attention. But hey, what can you do? I love all of them regardless. Speaking of characters, the characters in the picture, as I have already mentioned, don't really have any names because they've never been any specific characters from any of my stories or whatever. And I believe at that point I might not have had a story to work on to begin with. At best, my insect people story might have been in its infancy at the time. It's actually evident by the drawings I've made later. But anyway, my point is, if you have any suggestions on the names of these guys, in case you have any ideas, mention them in the comments and maybe they could reappear in some future videos, who knows? Or maybe I could reuse them for one of my stories, because They Will Be Calling Me is not a fantasy story, it's a science fiction story, so I would unlikely be able to use them there, but my insect people-centric story could totally utilize them, I believe. So yeah, if you have any questions regarding this piece or suggestions for future videos, write them in the comments down below as well. I would be glad to read them and answer to the best of my ability. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time in the next video. See ya!